First class, huh? Miles drawled, sarcasm dripping from his tone like syrup on a stack of pancakes. Guess they're letting anyone in these days. A man stood at a distance, watching him with a look of pure disdain, his arrogance impossible to conceal. But no one could have predicted what would happen next, an unexpected event that would leave everyone on the plane in stunned silence and forever change one person's life. Before we dive deeper into this incredible story, tell us where you're tuning in from. If you love gripping stories like this, be sure to subscribe, because tomorrow we have another unforgettable tale just for you. The chaos of Los Angeles International Airport, LAX, hummed like a living beast, a sprawling hub where travelers darted past with overstuffed suitcases and steaming Starbucks cups clutched tight. It was the kind of place that captured the frantic pulse of American life, everyone rushing to somewhere, anywhere, all at once. Amid the blur of gate announcements and rolling luggage, a guy in a Dodgers cap stood haggling over a $6 pretzel, his voice cutting through the din as he waved a crumpled $5 bill. Nearby, in the sleek first-class line, Keanu Reeves stood quietly, a stark contrast to the polished luxury around him. Dressed in a faded plaid shirt, worn jeans, and scuffed boots, he slung a beat-up backpack over one shoulder, a guy who looked more like he'd wandered in from a hiking trail than a VIP lounge. His easy calm seemed out of place, almost defiant, in a sea of designer labels and hurried strides. Right behind him loomed Miles Grayson, a man who wore his wealth like a badge, in a tailored suit that screamed money and shoes so shiny they caught the overhead lights. Miles exuded arrogance, his cologne wafting a bold 5 feet in every direction. He belonged here, or so he thought, his every move a silent shout of entitlement. His eyes flicked over the line, landing on Keanu with a smirk. "First class, huh?" Miles drawled, sarcasm dripping from his tone like syrup on a stack of pancakes. "Guess they're letting anyone in these days." Keanu turned slightly, meeting the jab with a steady gaze, and in that moment, the air crackled with an unspoken clash. Humility versus swagger, setting the stage for a showdown neither man saw coming. The line at LAX stretched on, a restless shuffle of travelers buzzing with impatience. But Keanu Reeves stood apart, an island of calm in the storm. Dressed in his faded plaid shirt and jeans that had seen better days, he didn't fidget or check his phone like everyone else. Instead, he pulled a 16-ounce water bottle from his weathered backpack, the kind you'd snag for $2 at an airport kiosk, and took a slow sip, his eyes scanning the crowd with quiet curiosity. It was a small, ordinary move, but it grounded him, making him feel like the guy you chat with at a gas station, not some first-class hotshot. The chaos around him, the blaring announcements, the clatter of suitcase wheels, the guy in the Dodgers cap still griping about his pretzel, didn't faze him one bit. Even when Miles Grayson, standing just behind, started tossing verbal jabs, Keanu didn't flinch. "First class, huh?" Miles had sneered earlier, his voice thick with mockery. But Keanu just gave a slight nod, like he was brushing off a fly. That unshakable cool wasn't forced. It was who he was, a man who didn't need to prove a thing to anyone. Miles Grayson, on the other hand, moved like he was auditioning for a role he'd already won. Every step was a performance, his polished shoes clicking against the floor with purpose, his tailored suit hugging him just right to scream success. That cologne cloud, strong enough to hit you from 5 feet away, wasn't an accident. It was a statement, a warning that he was somebody important. He scanned the first-class line with a predator's eye, sizing up everyone, his gaze lingering on Keanu with a mix of amusement and disdain. To Miles, this guy in scuffed boots and a thrift store vibe was a glitch in the system, a smudge on the polished surface of his world. He adjusted his cufflinks, probably worth more than Keanu's whole outfit, and let out a low chuckle, as if Keanu's presence was a personal insult. Miles didn't just walk. He strutted, each stride a rehearsed flex of confidence, a silent declaration that he belonged here, that this was his turf. Where Keanu seemed content to just be, Miles needed everyone to know. The difference between them wasn't just clothes or cash. It was deeper, a chasm of attitude. Keanu's calm wasn't weakness. It was strength, the kind that didn't need a spotlight. Miles's swagger wasn't just pride, it was armor, a shield against anyone who dared question his place. As the line inched toward the gate, Miles kept eyeing Keanu, waiting for a crack, a reaction. But Keanu just sipped his water again, unfazed, a faint smile tugging at his lips. Like he already knew how this story would end. The plane had barely leveled off at 30,000 feet when the first-class cabin turned into a quiet battlefield. Miles Grayson settled into his plush seat with the smugness of a guy who just won the lottery, couldn't resist poking at Keanu Reeves. It started with a casual lean, his voice loud enough to carry over the hum of the engines. "So, what do you do for a living?" he asked, eyeing Keanu like he was sizing up a stray dog at a country club. Keanu, tucking his beat-up backpack under the seat, glanced up and said simply, "I work in film." Miles arched an eyebrow, smirking. "Oh yeah, like infomercials or something?" Before Keanu could answer, the flight attendant swung by with drinks. Miles ordered champagne with a flourish. "Something that fits the vibe up here," while Keanu just nodded for water. Miles let out a sharp laugh, loud enough to turn heads. "Water? In first class? Man, you're killing me." Keanu took the bottle, unfazed, and replied, "Maybe the good stuff's different for everyone." The line landed like a soft punch. Simple, but it stung. Miles blinked, his grin faltering for a split second. The tension rippled through the cabin, and the other passengers started tuning Shaw. A gray-haired woman a few rows back, sipping her own drink, rolled her eyes at Miles's antics. When he kept going, muttering something about people who settle for less, she'd had enough. "Sit down, suit," she snapped, her voice cutting through the air like a diner waitress shutting down a loudmouth. "Nobody cares about your champagne." A few heads nodded, and a guy in a baseball cap stifled a chuckle. Miles's face tightened, but he brushed it off with a forced laugh, clearly rattled that his one-man show wasn't getting the applause he'd expected. Keanu, though, stayed cool as ever. Miles tried again, leaning closer. "You know, life's like first class. You earn it. You flaunt it. Some people just luck into it." Keanu set his water down, meeting Miles's gaze with that steady, unflappable look. "Luck or not, we're all landing in the same place, right?" Miles smirked, thinking he'd scored a point, but Keanu wasn't done. "I think the real value here isn't the seat. It's how you treat the people in 'em." The cabin went quiet, the words hanging heavy. Then came the knockout. "Real success doesn't need a billboard." It wasn't loud or flashy, just pure, unfiltered truth. The mood shifted hard. A couple across the aisle exchanged glances, nodding faintly. The woman who'd spoken up gave a small, approving grunt. Even the flight attendant, pouring coffee 2 rows down, shot Keanu a quick look of respect. Miles squirmed, his polished armor cracking. He'd wanted a fight, a chance to flex. But Keanu's calm wisdom was turning the tables. The cabin wasn't his stage anymore. It was Keanu's, and the audience was picking sides without saying a word. The flight was cruising smoothly at 30,000 feet. The first-class cabin, a mix of hushed chatter and the clink of glasses when everything flipped upside down. Miles Grayson had spent the last hour needling Keanu Reeves, his tailored suit and smug grin a billboard for his self-proclaimed superiority. Keanu, in his faded plaid shirt and jeans, had taken it all in stride, sipping his water and firing back quiet, cutting truths that left Miles scrambling. But the real bombshell was still coming. As the flight attendant made her rounds, her crisp uniform swaying with each step, she stopped by Keanu's seat with a warm smile. "Mr. Reeves," she said, her voice clear and professional. "The captain wanted me to confirm your connecting flight in Tokyo is all set. He sends his regards." The name hit the air like a thunderclap. Keanu Reeves. Miles froze mid-sip, his champagne glass hovering an inch from his lips. Whispers erupted around them, a low buzz spreading through the cabin like wildfire. "Wait. The Keanu Reeves?" a guy in a polo shirt muttered to his wife. "No way," she hissed back, craning her neck for a better look. Heads turned, eyes widened. Passengers who'd been half listening now stared openly, piecing it together. This wasn't just some guy in scuffed boots. This was a legend hiding in plain sight. Miles's jaw tightened, his polished facade cracking as the realization sank in. He'd been mocking a man whose name carried more weight than his entire wardrobe. His earlier jabs, "What do you do?" and "Water in first class?" echoed in his head like a bad rerun, each one a shovel digging his own grave. Keanu, though, didn't gloat. He nodded politely to the flight attendant, then turned to Miles, who looked like he'd just swallowed a lemon. "Something wrong?" Keanu asked, his tone even, almost gentle. Miles stammered, his voice a shaky mess. I didn't know. You didn't say who you were." Keanu leaned back, his steady gaze locking onto Miles. "Didn't think it mattered," he said, pausing for effect. "How you treat people doesn't change because of who I am." The words landed like a sledgehammer. Simple, direct, and brutal in their honesty. The cabin went dead silent, every passenger hanging on the exchange. The older woman who'd snapped at Miles earlier smirked, folding her arms with a satisfied nod. A businessman across the aisle set his laptop down, fully invested now. Miles sank into his seat, his face flushing red as the weight of his arrogance crashed down. He'd strutted in here, cologne and cufflinks blazing, thinking he owned the space, only to find out he'd been picking a fight with a giant. His hands fidgeted with his glass, the champagne suddenly tasting flat. Keanu's calm rebuke didn't just sting, it unraveled him, thread by thread, in front of everyone. The whispers grew louder, a mix of awe for Keanu and quiet scorn for Miles, who'd built his throne on sand. What started as a power play was now a public humbling, and the flight wasn't even half over. The first-class cabin felt heavier as the flight wore on, the air thick with the fallout of Keanu Reeves's quiet revelation. Miles Grayson sat slumped in his seat, his once unshakable confidence now a pile of rubble at his feet. The tailored suit, the polished shoes, the cologne that announced him from 5 feet away, all of it felt like a costume now, one that didn't fit anymore. He'd spent the last hour throwing jabs at Keanu, each one a brick in the wall of his own ego, only to watch it crumble when the flight attendant dropped that bombshell, "Mr. Reeves." Keanu wasn't just some guy in jeans. He was a name, a force, and Miles had been too busy flexing to see it. Now, alone with his thoughts, he stared at the empty champagne glass in his hand, the fizz long gone. A realization hit him, sharp and cold. He'd climbed the corporate ladder for 20 years, clawing his way up, rung by rung. But 5 minutes with this guy made it feel 10 feet shorter. The thought wasn't loud. It was a whisper, burrowing deep, shaking the foundation of everything he'd built his life on. The plane touched down in Tokyo, and as passengers shuffled toward the exit, something shifted. Miles lagged behind, watching Keanu step into the terminal. A young fan, struggling with a 30-pound suitcase that wobbled on its wheels, caught Keanu's eye. Without a word, Keanu knelt down, steadied the bag, and hoisted it onto a cart with a warm smile. No cameras, no fanfare, just a guy helping out. Miles stopped cold. That simple act cracked something open inside him, a flood of shame washing over his earlier arrogance. He'd mocked this man, belittled him, and here Keanu was, proving his worth without saying a thing. Swallowing hard, Miles approached, his voice low. "Hey, Keanu," he said, eyes on the floor. I'm sorry, not just for not knowing who you are, but I was a jerk. I acted like an ass. It wasn't polished or rehearsed, just raw, messy honesty. Keanu turned, his gaze steady but kind, no trace of triumph in it. He studied Miles for a beat, then spoke, his words cutting through the terminal noise. "Thanks for that," he said, pausing. "But it's more than an apology. Sometimes what we chase out there," he tapped his chest, right over his heart, "is what we're missing in here." The line hung there, simple yet seismic, like a lighthouse beam cutting through fog. Miles nodded slowly, the weight of it sinking in. Keanu didn't lecture or gloat. He offered a lifeline, a chance to rethink everything. As Keanu walked off, greeting another fan with that same easy smile, Miles stood rooted, hands shoved in his pockets. The ladder he'd climbed didn't seem so tall anymore, and for the first time in years, he wondered what he'd find if he stopped climbing and started looking inward. The plane had landed, the cabin emptied, and the hum of LAX faded into the background as Keanu Reeves and Miles Grayson stepped into the Tokyo terminal, a world away from where their story began. What unfolded on that flight wasn't just a clash of personalities. It was a mirror held up to the soul, reflecting truths that cut deeper than any boarding pass or bank account ever could. Keanu, with his faded plaid shirt and scuffed boots, had walked away unscathed, his quiet strength unshaken by Miles's barbs. Miles, though, was a different man now, his tailored suit feeling more like a straitjacket than a crown. The lesson that crystallized at 30,000 feet wasn't about who had the better seat. It was about something far more enduring. True worth isn't about wealth or status. It's how you treat others. That simple idea, delivered with Keanu's calm conviction, echoed through the cabin and lingered in Miles's mind, a whisper of something he'd long ignored. For Americans, this hits a nerve. It's a nation built on big dreams and bigger egos, where the grind never stops, and success is measured in dollars, followers, and corner offices. Miles embodied that hustle, the guy who'd spent 20 years climbing the ladder, polishing his shoes and his resume, convinced that the view from the top defined him. But Keanu was the flip side of the coin, the guy who didn't need to shout about his wins because they showed in his actions. When he helped that fan with the 30-pound suitcase, kneeling down in the terminal, no spotlight, no applause, it wasn't a performance. It was real. And in a country where everyone's racing for the next big thing, maybe the real win is keeping it real. That's the thread that ties this story to the American spirit. Not the glitz of Hollywood or Wall Street, but the quiet grit of fairness and authenticity. The idea that you don't have to step on someone to stand tall. Miles felt that shift as he watched Keanu disappear into the crowd, fans approaching him with shy smiles and quick selfies. Keanu didn't rush them off or puff up his chest. He listened, nodded, even laughed a little, his backpack still slung over one shoulder like he was just another traveler. Miles stood frozen, hands in his pockets, the weight of his apology still fresh on his tongue. "I was a jerk," he'd said. And Keanu's response, "Sometimes what we chase out there is what we're missing in here," had lodged itself in his chest like a splinter he couldn't pull out. It wasn't just about saying sorry. It was about seeing himself for the first time in years. He'd built a life on flash, 5-foot cologne clouds, $1,000 suits, champagne at 30,000 feet. But what did it mean if it was all a mask for the emptiness underneath? Keanu didn't have to say it. His presence screamed it. Real value isn't what you stack up. It's what you give away. That's the first lesson here. You're not your stuff. America loves its rags-to-riches tales, its bootstraps and billionaires. But this story flips the script. Miles thought he'd made it because he could afford the first-class seat, but Keanu showed him that a seat's just a seat. How you fill it matters more. When Miles mocked the water bottle, Keanu didn't blink. He sipped it and said, maybe the good stuff's different for everyone. It's a line that could have come straight out of a backyard barbecue, the kind of wisdom you'd hear from a grandpa in a rocking chair. And it stuck with Miles, because it was true. He'd been chasing a version of good that left him hollow, while Keanu found it in a $2 bottle and a kind word. For a culture obsessed with more money, more likes, more everything, it's a gut check maybe less is enough if it's honest. The second lesson is harder change starts with you. Miles didn't walk off that plane a saint, but he walked off different. Seeing Keanu lift that suitcase wasn't just a nice moment. It was a spark. He'd spent years judging people by their labels, suit or jeans, champagne or water, only to realize he'd misjudged himself most of all. That 10-foot ladder he'd built in his mind. It shrank because Keanu didn't climb one. He didn't need to. Miles's apology wasn't the end. It was a beginning, a crack in the armor he could widen if he chose to. America loves a comeback story, and this is Miles's shot at one. Not with a promotion or a PowerPoint, but with a quieter, tougher climb, figuring out who he is when the spotlight's off. Finally, there's hope in the mess. Keanu didn't fix Miles. He didn't have to. He just showed him a path, pointed to his chest and said, "Look here." It's not preachy. It's practical. In a world of noise, LAX chaos, social media flexes, 24/7 news cycles, Keanu's calm cut through like a knife. He didn't need to win an argument. He won by being himself. Miles saw it, and so did the passengers. The nods, the smirks, the silent cheers. It's a reminder that kindness isn't weak. It's a superpower, one anyone can tap into. For Americans, caught in the grind of competition, it's a lifeline you don't have to be the loudest to matter. As Keanu faded into the terminal crowd, Miles lingered, the lesson simmering. He didn't have all the answers. Hell, he barely had a start. But he had something new, a question. What's worth chasing? Not the next flight or the next deal, but the next chance to be better. Keanu left him with that, and it's what lingers for us too. In a land of dreamers and doers, where success is a moving target, maybe the truest win isn't out there. It's in how we show up, day after day, for the people around us. The wheels of the plane kissed the tarmac in Tokyo, and the first-class cabin emptied out, leaving behind the echoes of a confrontation that had shifted everything. Keanu Reeves and Miles Grayson stepped into the terminal, two men who'd boarded as strangers but disembarked with their lives subtly intertwined. What happened at 30,000 feet wasn't just a story of a humble guy schooling an arrogant one. It was a quiet earthquake, shaking loose truths about worth, pride, and second chances. As the crowd swirled around them, Miles lingered near the gate, hands shoved deep in his pockets, his polished shoes scuffing the floor. Ahead, Keanu moved through the bustle with that same easy calm, his plaid shirt and faded jeans a stark contrast to the sleek surroundings. Then it happened, a moment that sealed the lesson Miles couldn't unlearn. A fan, a young woman juggling a heavy suitcase that tipped the scales at maybe 30 pounds, struggled to keep it upright. Keanu didn't hesitate. He knelt down, flashed a warm smile, and lifted the bag onto her cart, chatting like they were old friends. Other fans approached, shy, starstruck, and he greeted each one with the same patience. No rush, no ego. Miles watched, rooted in place, the weight of it all pressing down on him like a 10-ton realization. That image, Keanu's effortless kindness, burned into Miles's mind, a stark mirror to the man he'd been hours ago. Back at LAX, he'd strutted into that first-class line like he owned it. His $1,000 suit and 5-foot cologne cloud, a loud declaration of his place in the world. He'd mocked Keanu's water bottle, his scuffed boots, his quiet demeanor, thinking it made him bigger. But now, standing in the terminal, Miles saw the truth Keanu didn't need to prove anything. His worth wasn't in his seat or his status. It was in that smile, that helping hand, that unshakable authenticity. Miles had spent 20 years climbing a ladder of success, measuring his life in bonuses and bragging rights, only to find it wobbling under the weight of his own emptiness. Keanu, with his beat-up backpack and simple words, "How you treat people doesn't change because of who I am," had dismantled that ladder without even trying. It wasn't about fame or fortune. It was about character, a currency Miles had never bothered to count until now. The first lesson hit hard. Real value doesn't shout. It shows. America's a land of loud dreams. Billboards on Sunset, influencers on Instagram, CEOs on magazine covers. And Miles had bought into it, hook, line, and sinker. He'd thought first class was a prize, a badge that set him apart. But Keanu flipped that on its head. When Miles sneered at the water over champagne, Keanu just shrugged and said, "Maybe the good stuff's different for everyone." It was a throwaway line that stuck, a reminder that worth isn't universal. It's personal. Miles had been chasing a shiny, hollow version of good, while Keanu found it in the small stuff. A 16-ounce bottle, a kind word, a lifted suitcase. For a culture obsessed with flexing, it's a wake-up call. You don't need a spotlight to shine. You just need to be real. Then there's the tougher lesson: you can't undo the past, but you can rewrite the next page. Miles's apology on the plane, "I was a jerk," wasn't pretty, but it was honest. A crack in the armor he'd worn too long. Seeing Keanu with that fan wasn't just a nice gesture. It was a spark, a shove toward something better. He judged Keanu by his jeans, his job, his lack of flash, only to realize he'd misjudged himself most of all. That ladder he'd climbed, it didn't lead where he thought. Standing there, hands in his pockets, Miles felt the first flicker of a fresh start. Not a grand redo, but a quiet pivot. America loves a redemption arc. Rocky running up those steps, the underdog clawing back, and this was Miles's shot. Not with a new suit or a corner office, but with a question, who am I when no one's watching? Keanu didn't demand it. He just showed it, and that was enough. The deepest lesson, though, is hope. Messy, human hope. Keanu didn't fix Miles. He didn't need to. He pointed to his chest and said, "Sometimes what we chase out there is what we're missing in here," leaving Miles with a seed he could plant or ignore. Watching Keanu fade into the crowd, Miles didn't have answers. Just a stirring, a sense that this wasn't the end but a beginning. Keanu's kindness wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It cut through the noise of the terminal, the flight, the world, like a beacon. For Americans, caught in the grind of competition and comparison, it's a lifeline. You don't have to be the richest or the flashiest to matter. You just have to show up, authentically, for the people around you. Miles stayed there, the terminal alive with travelers rushing past, suitcases rolling, voices overlapping, life moving on. Keanu was gone now, swallowed by the crowd, but his shadow lingered. Miles pulled his hands from his pockets, flexing his fingers like he was letting go of something heavy. He didn't know what came next. A new job, a new mindset, a new way to measure a day. But he knew it started here, with a choice. Keanu had given him that. Not with a lecture, but with a life lived out loud in the quietest way. It's what sticks in a world that demands you prove your worth with every step. Maybe the truest proof is how you lift others up, one suitcase, one smile, one moment at a time. The Tokyo terminal buzzed with life as Keanu Reeves and Miles Grayson stepped off the plane. The echoes of their first-class showdown fading into the hum of rolling suitcases and hurried goodbyes. What started as a tense exchange at LAX had unraveled into something bigger. A quiet revelation that left the cabin, and now the reader, with a lot to unpack. Keanu, with his worn plaid shirt and scuffed boots, slipped into the crowd like he'd never been the center of it all, while Miles lingered near the gate, hands in his pockets. his tailored suit suddenly feeling like a relic of a man he wasn't sure he wanted to be anymore. This wasn't just a story about a flight. It was a window into the human condition, a testament to the power of humility over hubris. It leaves us with admiration for Keanu's unshakable decency, hope that Miles might turn a corner, and a gentle push to look at ourselves, proof that kindness can slice through the chaos, even at 30,000 feet. Keanu's humility wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. From the moment he stood in that first-class line at LAX, sipping a 16-ounce water bottle like any regular Joe, he carried himself with a quiet strength that didn't demand attention, but earned it anyway. When Miles threw jabs, "What do you do?" or "Water in first class?" Keanu didn't flinch. He met each one with calm, cutting truths. "Maybe the good stuff's different for everyone, sure." Or, "Real success doesn't need a billboard." Even when the flight attendant called him Mr. Reeves, revealing a name that made Miles's jaw drop, Keanu didn't puff up. He just said, "How you treat people doesn't change because of who I am," and kept being himself. That's what we admire. Not the fame, not the status, but the guy who stayed grounded when he could have soared. In a culture where everyone's chasing the spotlight, Instagram likes, corner offices, viral moments, Keanu's a reminder that you don't need to shout to be seen. His humility wasn't weakness. It was a superpower, one that left Miles reeling, and the rest of us nodding in quiet awe. Then there's Miles, the man who boarded that plane with a 5-foot cologne cloud and a chip on his shoulder, only to step off with something new hope. His transformation wasn't instant or cinematic. He didn't rip off his suit and start handing out hugs. But it started. When he apologized to Keanu, voice low and rough, "I was a jerk." It wasn't just about misjudging a celebrity. It was about seeing himself clearly for the first time. Keanu's response, pointing to his chest, "Sometimes what we chase out there is what we're missing in here," planted a seed. And when Miles watched Keanu help a fan with a 30-pound suitcase in the terminal, smiling like it was nothing, that seed cracked open. He'd spent 20 years climbing a ladder of wealth and status, only to realize it was leaning against the wrong wall. America loves a comeback story. Think Rocky? Think the kid who makes it out of nowhere. And Miles's isn't over. It's just beginning, fragile but real. That flicker of change gives us hope. Not because he's fixed, but because he's trying. It's a messy, human thing, and it's enough. The real kicker, though, is the nudge this story gives us to look in the mirror. Keanu didn't just school Miles. He held up a lens for everyone on that plane, and now for us. Miles thought worth came from his seat, his suit, his swagger. But Keanu showed it's in the small stuff, a kind word, a steady gaze, a hand lifting someone else's load. At 30,000 feet, where the air's thin and the stakes feel high, Keanu's kindness cut through the noise like a blade. Sharp, clean, undeniable. It drowned out Miles's bravado, the cabin's whispers, the hum of the engines. And down here on the ground, it's no different. We're all racing, through airports, jobs, lives, chasing something to prove we matter. But this story asks, what if we're chasing the wrong thing? Keanu didn't need to win an argument. He won by being decent. Miles didn't lose a fight. He lost an illusion. It's a push to ask ourselves, are we the guy who lifts the suitcase, or the one who laughs at the guy who does? It's not preachy. It's personal, and it sticks. The lessons pile up like luggage on a carousel. First, worth isn't what you own. It's what you do. Miles's $1,000 suit didn't make him better. Keanu's faded jeans didn't make him less. Second, change is hard, but possible. Miles's ladder might have shrunk 10 feet in his mind. But that's where growth starts in the cracks. Third, kindness isn't soft. It's fierce. A force that can shift a room, a flight, a life. America's a land of hustle, where we're told to grind and shine. But this story flips it. You don't need to be the loudest to leave a mark. Keanu proved that at cruising altitude, And Miles felt it on the ground. It's a call to strip away the flash and find what's real. Not in our wallets, but in our actions. As Miles stood there, watching Keanu fade into the terminal crowd, still smiling, still helping, still himself, he felt the weight of a fresh start. He didn't have it all figured out. Who does? But he had a spark, a chance to rethink the man he'd been. Keanu didn't demand it. He offered it, with every quiet word and steady look. This story leaves us with that same spark admiration for a guy who didn't need to flex, hope for a guy who might stop trying to, and a nudge to check our own baggage. Kindness cut through the noise up there, and it can down here too, if we let it. The tallest tree grows from the smallest seed, but only if it bends with the wind. It's Keanu's humility, Miles's bend, and our chance to grow, deep, simple, and true.